channel. Hey yo, listen up, yeah. Hey yo, the wireless woman.
You in charge of the girls, right?
I am in charge of the girls.
Are you in charge of the girls?
I am in charge of the girls.
Okay.
All right, welcome back, Wi-Fi's, to yet another episode of The Wireless Woman. Go ahead and do me a favor on your way in and like this video. I mean, when you like it, well, I love it, and that's our way of taking attendance around these parts so we know who showed up for class. Also, if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. And click the notification bell for uploads. That way you'll be notified anytime I post new content or whenever I am going live.
If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great.
So today I'm trying something a little different, and this more than likely will not end up being the ongoing format for my channel. However, a lot of times I find myself not really able to put out the amount of content that I would like to, simply because I am not always content ready. You know, I spent a lot of time and energy on making my yellow room, my room 303. And it really is a huge production that goes into how I show up on camera. And as much as I would love to show you my gorgeous, beautiful, infallible face on every single solitary episode, it doesn't actually really seem to be making a huge difference in my viewership. And as I said, a lot goes into what becomes a really huge production to put on these episodes. You know, I have hair, makeup, costume, and there's actually a lot that goes into which clothes I pick before I come on to my camera. You know, I make my signs in the back every week. They say something different, and I really have a very high quality approach to how I produce my episodes. So I'm trying something a little bit different just to actually make sure I'm able to put out more content, and we will see how it goes. So I'm on here today to talk about the new movie on Netflix, Blonde. And let me start by saying that I have been really surprised by the amount of outrage coming out of the non-melanated community about this movie, especially because this is something they've kind of been clamoring for. You know, we've had tons and tons of Black biopics come out. We have had the Fred Hampton film. You know, we've had just the Black Panther movie. We've had The Woman King. And so between Elvis coming out and then Blonde, which is this movie about Marilyn Monroe, you know, we're not going to ever get too far out in life without white people wanting to make sure that their icons are remembered for every single generation. So there have been Elvis movies before. There have been Marilyn movies before, but they had to revamp them for this generation. And the Blonde movie didn't bother me at all. The movie really seemed to enrage their community, and they immediately came to the defense of the white female image.
Spectacle of abuse and suffering that has nothing to add to the conversation about Hollywood other than shock value visuals. Marilyn deserved better than being objectified all over again for 3 hours in this misery porn masquerading as a biopic.
Unfortunately, well, Blonde it's disgusting.
And I get it. It made total sense to me. If that movie had been made about a Black woman, I doubt there would have been that amount of outrage. However, you know, I get it. You're not going to want to see a white female sex symbol, you know, an icon portrayed like a victim. Now, for me, I enjoyed the film. I felt like I myself have had family members that have suffered with mental illness, and Marilyn Monroe, for all intents and purposes, could be categorized as a promiscuous, drug addicted whore with mental illness. I'm not calling her that. These are not my words. I'm simply saying that if someone chose these words, one could see why. And as a person who has had family members who has had drug addictions, because you remember the whole, crack, we can't call it a pandemic like they do with opioids, but, crack in the community in the 80s meant a lot of black women and children grew up watching this same type of behavior. If you go back and watch Holiday Heart or New Jack City, the caricature of the black crack hoe is, it's archetypal. I mean, Halle Berry made her career off of her first role in Jungle Fever for that very same characterization there. So one could characterize Marilyn Monroe as being the crack hoe of the white community, but I won't. These are not my words. I mean, no disrespect. And so it doesn't shock me to see so many people coming to her defense, and saying that this was a poor characterization. This was a poor portrayal of her life. Now, I want to make a caveat and say, a lot of people talked about Ana de Armas' performance as Marilyn Monroe and how they felt like she got robbed because it should have been done in a better film. I think it was a masterful performance with the material that she was given. You don't judge the actor's performance by the writing. If the writers don't get an Oscar this year, well, oh well. You judge the actor's performance by their portrayal. And she was spot on, dead on. I think that Ana de Armas deserves just as much acclaim, just as much praise for her role as Austin Butler does for his portrayal of Elvis. I mean, honestly, both films were pretty trash from a writing standpoint. I really felt like Austin embodied what we all know to be Elvis, but they didn't really give him much more than 2 dimensions in his film either. But people called the Blonde movie, the Marilyn Monroe movie, misery porn. Misery porn. And I thought that was wild because all of black culture, the music, the art, the movies, is poverty porn. I mean, if we're going to start categorizing film based on the writing, I mean, we have characterized the black community like trash all over the media platforms, even now. And I think it's telling that we see so much pushback from the white community on this characterization. I watched the whole entire movie, all 3 hours of it. I wanted to turn it off several times. I had like other things to do with my life, so I did walk away a couple times. But I felt drawn back into it because they talked a lot about how Marilyn had been reduced down to victimization, that every scene was her going from tragic, victimizing experience to the next. But I believe that a lot of women, particularly black women, can understand the plight of the situation, because honestly, this movie looked worse on white patriarchy than it did on Marilyn. Because if you go back and watch footage of this woman, the greatest act and performance that she was putting on was reducing herself to being nothing much more than a sex symbol. This was not a Kardashian. This woman had intellect. She wrote poems. Yes, there was a lot more to Marilyn than what has been known to be depicted of her. However, Not much. And it's not because she didn't have that to offer the world. It was because the opportunity to offer those things weren't given. If you don't think so many women have had to sleep their way to the top, have had to open vacant doe-like eyes and present themselves as being available to every and any man, you know, this showed in her public and her private life. A lot of things that we would love to say that Marilyn was above, like domestic violence, like drug and alcohol abuse, like promiscuity, like mental health, she wasn't. And I find it so interesting that white people don't want to see a white woman portrayed that way. They don't want to see her traumas aired in the light of day that way. But she's no different than every other woman who has dealt with the mental illness that comes from fatherlessness, that comes from heredity. Because, as I said in one of my last videos, white people act like racism is not a mental health issue. It is. They act as though the chickens are never going to come to roost. But we saw it with crack in the communities in the 80s, and then it became an opioid crisis in the 2020s. And then it became an opioid crisis. And then it became an opioid crisis in the 2000s. Because, of course, who was mostly involved? White women. See, our men were crack dealers. Their men were pharmaceutical sales. So it's the same behavior, but we see a different response because their community is built on community. That's how white supremacy holds on the power. It holds on the power through community. That's why white supremacy expands its gates to include Asians, to include Indians, to include black men who are rich, to include anyone who will promote capitalistic, white supremacist, patriarchal, misogynistic values. White men hold on to power through the compliance of white women. And that showed in this film, you know, being that submissive, being that physically and emotionally available to appease the needs, the lust, the desires of men, made this woman little more than a human condom. That cries for help went ignored. And if that can happen to a white woman who has the power structure behind her, who gives birth to the men who dominate the global economy. I'm not wrong about this. You know, the multi-billionaires that we have, there are white men. And yes, we do have some black male billionaires and one black female billionaire. But we're not talking about multi-billionaires. They got a little change. But compared to the people that run the world, that have the rockets, you know, we're watching Kanye, who is a black billionaire, be in contention for his own company, for his own likeness. Why? Because it was built with the partnership of white capitalism. If he owned it, if it was his, it would be a whole totally, first of all, he'd never be a billionaire. Let's just start there. But Oprah, you know, all of these black people that we see, Jordan, that are doing these great feats in wealth building have built it in collaboration with the white power structure. So here's a product. Here's a white female product of the white power structure and what it does to people. And white people don't even want to see that be portrayed. Now, if it had been a film about slaves, it would have been okay. If it had been a slave woman who went from scene to scene to scene, being raped, sodomized, victimized, denigrated. If it had been a black woman whose whole, I mean, that's kind of what The Color Purple is when you think about it. That's what The Help is. Misery porn is okay when it's black people. When it's black women particularly. Because honestly, I can't even watch Diary of a Mad Black Woman or What's Love Got to Do with It. You know, as a child of domestic violence, I watched my mom be dragged down hallways like that. I watched my mom be humiliated in front of people. I've seen her clothes thrown out on the front yard. You know, and I have tried my best in my own life not to repeat those cycles. And one thing I can say is there has to be education. There has to be transparency in order to heal those wounds. Any covered wound is not going to heal. And while we're being encouraged endlessly to put the blinders back on, that's not going to be the way that we actually move forward. When we talk about generational wealth, a big part of generational wealth is mental, physical, spiritual wellness. We've given away everything that used to be a staple of black power, the black church, the black community, black economics, for the sake of saying that it has all belonged to white people. But we look at how white people treat their image. Their image, your image says so much about what you think about yourselves. And they'll get in whole rooms together and sing every single lyric, including all the niggas, when they're in rooms together with each other, to a Lil Wayne song. I have been there. I have been the only black person in a room, and the wanton, brazen amount of vigor that they will put into rap lyrics. I mean, it's scary. It's scary. But, I mean, they gave us those names. So, to a certain extent, why don't we give that back? Why don't we give back the characterization of black people in rap music videos and films? Because while we were busy talking about white outrage at the black Little Mermaid, they have been losing their minds over here about this Blind movie. And I just kind of wanted to come in and say, there's intersectionality. I am black, and I know that my blackness is supposed to take priority over being a woman, over my femininity. However, as a woman who has been in arts and entertainment, I can 100% attest to women being forced, coerced into having an abortions for their career. Lauryn Hill talks about it on her song Zion. I can personally attest to having my masters be held from a recording session that I did with an engineer whom I paid in full for his services. But afterwards, he said he was going to keep my masters if I didn't sleep with him. I didn't see anything in that movie that I haven't seen women go through. I have seen black women lose their mind. I mean, white women too. more often than not, actually. It's something that they would call in the old days hysteria. Women would have hysteria. And I've seen women be abused and misused to the point of hysteria. They would become catatonic. They'd have to institutionalize a lot of them. And it's crazy because I'm watching a lot of black women now want to compete with white women for resting in our femininity and being damsels, as if it could happen in this generation and population of men. But hey, set yourself off. Set yourself off. But I will say this, those housewives, those fit, feminine, friendly women were more often than not on heavy doses of Prozac, Paxil, antidepressants. They would drink martinis, mimosas, at lunch and be high as a kite by the time their kids and husbands got home. These were not happy women. They just weren't. I mean, there's been information put out that slaves were happy in slavery. I mean, shortly after slaves were released, there were a lot of people that didn't release their slaves, and they said that they're happy, they want to stay here. That's a true statement. You know, when Kanye said that black people, that slavery was a choice, everybody was upset about that. But there were lots of countries that fought for their freedom, like Haiti. You know, there were Nat Turners. That was a much more common occurrence than people thought it was. Eventually, freedom was honestly won because there was so much insurrection in the South of these black African and indigenous slaves revolting and killing whites, that honestly the North stepped in and they said, listen, we can't have this amount of terrorism, bloodshed in our country. Not only are you white people in the South not safe from your own slaves, we're not safe. They're escaping from plantations with madness, killing white people in the North as well. And I'm not characterizing black people as being violent. I'm just saying that in times past, there was a lot of fear of us, and that fear, aggression, is what we're dealing with. That's what causes people to want to oppress. Like black women, it's not everything we've been told that black men are upset about. It's not that you're fat. You're not the only group of women that's fat. It's not that you're outlandish and rude and mean. You're not the only group of women that do that. Sofia Vergara on Modern Family plays a very aggressive, angry, at times violent Latin woman. And people find her characterization hilarious. Hilarious. Just like when all of the black women are categorized on black shows, Wanda, Shanae, they're unattractive. They have bad attitudes. People think it's very entertaining. They think it's extremely hilarious. So that's not the problem. The problem is fear. You make them afraid. So I had a meeting today because over the course of my work, I meet lots of people, and I'm not going to speak on my podcast about my work, but I do want to speak on this encounter. So we got into a conversation about white supremacy and what we as black people need to do. And during this discussion, I had that conversation. I said, listen, there's more black women in these spaces getting this access to resources, to knowledge, to information. They have the degrees, they're buying property, they're starting businesses. And he said to me, don't you think that's the problem? He said, I really think that black women are wielding too much power. You know, at a certain point as a man, you want to come home and you don't want to feel like you're not equal. Now, y'all know me, because I got my own inner dialogue. I'm like, what's that got to do with me? What's that got to do with whether or not I'm able to get higher education or access to property? That's got nothing to do with me. I can't just sit here on the plantation waiting for you to come back for me, waiting for you to go get what it is we need. And here's the thing. I told him, he said, do you think, you know, women are becoming too powerful? I said, yes. And I let him know, I see both sides of it. You're absolutely right. You know, there are tons of things that white men will support in the behavior of a black woman that they would never allow black men to do. But if the point and the goal is to build, who cares who has the hammer and who holds the nail? The competition is not between me and you. I said, if the white man will put the black woman in a position of power, who are you mad at? The black woman or the white man? And baby, when I say crickets. Because here's the thing, white men give black men power as well. And they get on platforms and denigrate their whole community. And here's the thing about it. Did it ever dawn on anybody that maybe these entertainers, celebrities, and athletes are getting paid to say it? That they're getting paid to influence people to accept white supremacy.
I am not a role model. I'm not paid to be a role model.
Patriarchy. You know, these folks wanted to act like the things that were happening in this Blonde movie were fiction, were dramatizations. That's what I kept hearing. That they took creative licenses, that they went too far. What about the Jeffrey Epsteins? What about the Harvey Weinsteins? I don't know if I'm saying these people's names right, but it's a lot of Steins. My point is, when women talk, when whole groups of women come out and say they were drugged by Bill Cosby, when whole groups of women come out and Me Too and say how uncomfortable they were made to feel by these directors, producers, writers, comedians, artists, athletes, I find it crazy that a film that actually categorizes what these women have claimed is considered to be too far, too much, fictional, dramatization. It's cognitive dissonance. It is people wanting to remain in disillusionment and darkness. And here's the thing. I'm not here to wake the sleeping dreamer. You know, I'm here to sound the alarm for people who are awake and who see what all of these things mean.
But if you see what I see, if you feel as I feel, and if you would seek as I seek.
You know, I didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world's been turning, but we can either drink the cup of water or we can use each one of our cups of water to put it out. And we can't put it out when we tell lies about what the patriarchy, about what misogyny is doing to whole communities of people. It's no different than the way that the whole entire narrative of white supremacy, of people going. I mean, as soon as the queen died, everybody came out talking about how imperialism and colonialism, how the English empire, the English monarchy has been in all of these countries, making their wealth off of the poverty of all of these other countries, mining these African countries and taking scarce resources from island countries to prop up their monarchy. But all of a sudden, when we start in the black community talking about and addressing misogyny, like it's a real thing. I don't think I know any woman, and I've heard men get on social media platforms and say they've never seen a woman be beaten. They've never seen women be oppressed. They've never seen, because we're fixing it. But I don't honestly think, I think people just say stuff, for clout. I don't know. But I don't honestly think any of us actually don't know anyone who suffered domestic violence, who has been in relationships with men that led to them becoming drug addicted. I don't think any of us don't know these women. And I think it's sad that while a woman like Marilyn Monroe can have her story told, mostly all of these crack hoes that died in ditches with needles in their arms shall remain nameless. They have shown us through years and years and decades that they don't love us and they don't care about us. And I'm going to give the disclaimer caveat that must be given whenever any black woman tries to expose the truth about our community, our relationships, our interactions with our male counterparts. No, it is not all black men. I've heard it say that it is not most black men, but I'd like to see someone prove that. But here's the thing, okay? Even if it's not most black men, are there enough men to police misogyny? Are there enough men to make a more perfect union? Because these same people who are saying that this stuff in Blonde didn't happen and that, this poor white woman was characterized as a victim, are the same people who are upset at all the men in the Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade, as if these same white men are not victimizing us all. How creepy are you people? How creepy are you people that you pick a set of rules for one situation or one group of people and then completely change the script up for a whole different group of people? But here's the thing. How ridiculous are the people who see this happening and then sit back and be like, well, I don't think they meant it like that. Y'all are weird. Like really strange. But I have been away. And I went away to come and bring back something that made sense for me to say. And I really feel like I said it. I'd like to see you speak your speech down in the comments. Let me know what you think about this particular podcast. If this is something that you like, that you want to see more of, if you hate and think is a whole terrible bad idea, because you might really want to see my face and my pretty white teeth. Even though I got to be honest, continuing for a long time at great lengths to speak like this, to say what I really want to say, is probably going to get me fired or fined or killed. I just never know. It all depends on what amount of power we can amass, how safe we are in this world. As black people anyway. But until the next episode of The Wireless Woman, class is now dismissed.
Go fuck yourself.
No.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.